Good afternoon. So I know it's really hard to stop the talking at your table. One of the greatest parts about the GA is seeing old friends, making new friends, exchanging best practices. But we are so gratified that you chose to spend part of your afternoon with us. And because this panel is going to be fascinating, I know you're not going to want it to end when our time is up. So because of that, I'm going to start it on time here. And I am going to tell you who I am. I'm Jason Wooliger. I am the chair of the Domestic Policy and Government Affairs Council for JF&A, which is a really long way of saying that I help to oversee public affairs from the lay leadership side of the equation. And you, in case you are in the wrong room, this is the room for the wild, wild west of social media. And we intend to make this panel as exciting as it sounds. So I'm going to tell you who the panelists are in a little bit, but first let me just give you a little bit of an introduction on this topic area. So look, we know that social media, like all technology, can be used for both good and evil, right? Any technology is really about how you employ it. And in our case, with social media, we have seen it really revolutionize communication and advocacy. But at the same time, it has also brought about an unbelievable level of online hate. And because of the amount of hate, it has led to our work in my area of JF&A to encourage greater legislative and regulatory frameworks to monitor the hate and to moderate the hate and hopefully eventually eliminate it from these online platforms. So some of our advocacy highlights in this space, which we're going to talk more about over the course of the panel, is JF&A got deeply involved in the legislation that forced the TikTok divestiture from ByteDance. And so we're going to hear more about where that stands right now, but we were thrilled when that became law. We've advocated for increased accountability for social media companies. We've supported measures that would enforce clear guidelines and penalties for allowing hate speech to flourish. And we've partnered with other organizations to advocate for expanded education on digital hate, aiming to promote digital literacy and to combat misinformation. So we're going to talk today about anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiment manifest on social media, recent legal challenges, methods to track and measure hate, and strategic steps in legislative advocacy. And to lay out sort of the context for all of this, we're thrilled to have Adam Neufeld, who currently serves as the COO, the Chief Operating Officer of the ADL. He oversees the work of a wide cross-section of ADL's programmatic activities, including domestic and international policy, field offices, education, and research centers. He's going to lay out the current landscape on social media and speak to ADL's role in tracking instances of online hate and the changes we've seen in a post-October 7th world. So Adam, come on up. Thank you.
All right. So, I'm not that tall, or this is very much. All right. So normally I start these things with just kind of getting a sense of where people are at and how much they know and how much they've personally experienced, right? So I can guess, but how many of you have seen something personally anti-Semitic online? All right. That's usually the easy one. Okay. How many of you have been harassed in some way? Something where okay, that usually goes down. Who's changed their behavior in some way because of anti-Semitism online? Who's changed it offline, right? So because of something online, you do something different. All right. Okay, so you all are actually pretty representative, right? So you're here because you're interested in this area, right? And so we know that even before 10/7, anti-Semitism online was a massive problem, right? But post 10/7, as you all know, depending on your space, it's gone up even more, right? And so the stats bear out people's hand raising, right? So for example, on Twitter, we saw the week before and the week after 10/7 about a 900% increase in anti-Semitism, right? It's gone down some, but it is still way higher than on 10/6. We also see it on violent threats on Telegram, which probably most of you are not on, right? But where some of the bad actors, as well as some good actors, are on, we've seen that go about 40% since 10/7, right? Harassment, That's at about 34% for all Jews. We do an annual survey and it keeps going up. And about 40% have changed their behavior in some way, right? Maybe it's online, maybe it's offline. Again, this is the world we're in, all right? And we also, I think many of us know that it's not going to necessarily get better, right? If anything, a lot of the trends are getting worse. We have not seen generative AI and ChatGPT really used for harassment yet, outside of a few narrow areas, right? I'm guessing people have generally not had any deep fakes made of themselves at this point. If you have, I'd love to chat with you after. You know, if we do this in a year, probably a few of you will raise your hands, right? Especially if you're the more outspoken people of this of a community of Jews, right? We also have more normalization of anti-Semitism coming our way, right? Whichever way you look. All right, so what are we going to do about it and what this panel is going to be about? I think there are three main areas, and each one is not going to be easy, but it gives us a fighting chance if we're all in this together. So the first is about government advocacy. So you heard before JFNA, ADL, lots of groups have had legislative agendas. The Trump victory changes what that's going to look like and probably across the board decreases it, right? There may be some government actions that have a downstream impact on the online hate space. So for example, designation of Samadoun or certain Islamist-related extremists could end up changing a little bit of online, but even there it might not. Samadoun is still on Twitter, has 22,000 or so followers, but its web presence has gone a little fritzy right now, right? So we're not even sure we're going to get that. We also might see places where some of the kind of censorship mentality that has been motivating some state laws starts to come up at the federal level. So for those who are kind of inside baseball on this, 2 states, Florida and Texas, tried to pass laws that basically said social media companies and others cannot discriminate based on viewpoint. They were very focused on conservative censorship. It's stuck in the courts, but you can see that, and it's been talked about in Project 2025 and otherwise as being a possibility. So you could see more of those kinds of things. But it's going to be an uphill battle. It's also a state legislature. We passed a law mandating transparency in California. It, after passing the trial court, is now stayed. X sued us, right? X sued for that suit, right? So you can get a sense of where government advocacy is or probably is not going. But there's other hopes, right? So the second one, if I go in increasing levels of optimism or less pessimism, is around corporate engagement, advocacy. Lots of folks have been using their muscles in various ways with companies. Some people report in and say, why aren't you doing this? Take this down. Others have done kind of bigger efforts. We led an effort against Facebook a few years ago to get them to address Holocaust denialism, where we got hundreds of companies to pause their advertising. We still have some room to go on that, but but in a world in which free speech ethos is on the rise here, we're not in a wave where we're going to get a lot. But I do anticipate we will get some wins. I think gaming companies, which are really lagging behind, are going to get a little bit better. We're about to put out a study next week or later this week that finds millions of profiles on some of the gaming platforms of ISIS praise and swastikas and all this horrible stuff. I think you're going to get some there. I think you might get things like some of the Wikipedia anti-Semitic bias. I think you might get some of the small amounts of bias in generative AI like ChatGPT and others. You might get Zionist as a slur, for example, more identified, something WJC is working on, and others. We're already seeing more companies be willing to do that. So I think you're going to get some. But I actually think the biggest path that we're going to see is more structural and individual behavior change, right? So all of you who raised your hands about how you changed your behavior in some way because of online harassment, you generally did it in clunky ways, right? You exited a platform, right? You just said, I'm not going to be there. Or maybe you tried to figure out blocking and it kind of works, but it's a real pain in some way or another. That's a really primitive world. I think we're starting to go to a world where I make the analogy to climate change. So in the climate change world, there's a lot of talk of mitigation and adaptation. So mitigation means let's try to stop the impacts of climate change, right? Let's see if we can slow it in some way. Lots of energy on that. But climate change activists are starting to move also to adaptation. They're going to say the sea's going to rise, right? The temperature's going to change. What can we do to protect ourselves a little bit more? Should we build differently? Should we do other things differently? That is the world I believe we're entering when it comes to online hate and harassment. We're going to keep trying to fight, and I encourage all of us, and we're not giving up the fight. But I think what you're going to see is more adaptation, more like how do you survive in this world as a vulnerable population without necessarily being able to fix the underlying problems, right? More options for protecting yourselves, more companies offering things like insurance in case you get harassed online or review bombed in some way. More things like, can I get a wrapper around my platform so it filters out in the way that I want? Right now, you can't do any of those things. But I do think we're going to do more and more. And I think companies will start to compete on this, right? And people will start creating things like we're doing now, WhatsApp groups or private Facebook groups or things like that. It will not necessarily be the lovely public square that we may all want, free of anti-Semitism, but I do think we're going to be able to get back our lives in lots of ways, protect people, but it's not going to look the same. And so that is what I think of as sort of like the next big phase that will hopefully mean so that in a year from now, when everybody's going to raise their hand, when they say, I've changed my behavior online, but you're going to have a lot of options and a lot of protections. So again, it's not a great situation. We're going to keep working. I think the panelists are going to lay out lots of good ideas, but we're going to all need to do this together. You're going to need to make some choices, educate yourself, and by doing that all together, I think we can put a really big dent in this anti-Semitism online. That's as hopeful as I can get right now, just to be clear.
All right, so now it's my pleasure to welcome up our panelists. All right, I'm looking who's coming first. We have Gretchen Barton, founder of Worthy Strategy Group, LLC, and a former research director at Future Majority. We have Ifat Barak Cheney, the Director of International Affairs and the Executive Director of the Institute for Technology and Human Rights at the World Jewish Congress. And we have Rick Lane, the founder and CEO of Iggy Ventures, LLC. He's a tech policy expert, child safety advocate, and the founder, as I just said, of Iggy Ventures. Iggy advises and invests in companies, projects, and public policy initiatives that can positively impact society. So this panel is very exciting to me because you're going to get to hear a bit of the behind the scenes of how some things that you saw in the news came to be, and we're going to also talk about the future. So things that you will see in the news, and you're going to know about it ahead of time. So I am going to start with Rick. Rick, about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, October 7th happens. There's this dramatic uptick in anti-Semitism on TikTok in particular. And that at that time, you began, or rather we began, JF&A to engage with you on the topic. And you were very supportive of us getting more involved. And we became, thanks to our partnership, the only Jewish advocacy group to join in the effort to force TikTok's divestiture, alongside groups focused on child safety, anti-drug advocacy, et cetera. So the bill obviously passed both houses of Congress. There was overwhelming bipartisan support and was signed into law by President Biden. Can you tell us where do things stand today? And what do you think the impact of it is going to be on TikTok's practices?
Well, first of all, I want to thank the Jewish Federation for helping in this important role. The TikTok legislation was different. I focused a lot of my time on child safety, online child safety. But TikTok I had been writing about for several years as a national security threat, which is when I was approached by some other folks who shared those concerns, and we began working on legislation and began reaching out to other groups to get involved. And I always like to say that the Jewish community was sort of the canary in the coal mines of how an algorithm can be weaponized in data to change public policy. And that's what we're seeing. So what we focus on is not the content because of First Amendment issues, but on the conduct of weaponization of an algorithm with mass amounts of data in the hands of 170 million Americans. And so no one thought we could get this through. 3 weeks before the bill was introduced, TikTok was celebrating in Singapore that they had, weren't going to get any legislation through. Little they know that we've been working on legislation for 3 months, and it was introduced and it moved rapidly through Congress. I don't think anyone saw it coming. No one thought we could get things done within a matter of a month, 2 months, through the legislative process in a strong bipartisan way. And so where it is now, it's in the courts. So after the legislation was enacted and signed, TikTok sued the US government, claiming constitutional problems with the legislation. But there's one thing I always want to be clear on, and this is one of the most frustrating aspects. Businesses are still doing business with TikTok. The Capitals, Washington Caps, who I'm a big fan of, has a TikTok deal. So you go to a Washington Caps game and you see TikTok all over the place. But the Congress and the administration have deemed TikTok a national security threat. The litigation is whether or not the remedy to deal with the national security threat is constitutional. Those are two separate things. So all the people who are campaigning and on TikTok, all the businesses that are buying ads on TikTok, all the people who have partnerships with TikTok are engaged right now with an enemy of the state. And we need to make sure that that's clear. So what we're hoping for in the next month or so is that the DC Circuit of Appeals, because it went straight to the DC Circuit, the way the legislation was drafted, heard oral arguments. We think, based on those oral arguments and the response from the judges, a 3-judge panel, that we are in good shape, but you never know what a court's going to do. Once that decision comes out, then there's the ability for a full panel of the DC Circuit, and then after that, it's the Supreme Court. My personal view and hope is that the DC Circuit will be 3-0 on side of the constitutionality of the remedy to fix the national security problem. And the full panel will not want to hear it. And the Supreme Court will say, well, we agree, and there's no reason for it to be in front of the Supreme Court. So that's our hope. What will happen after that, or should happen during that time, is TikTok should be divested. If they are not, then their app will no longer be able to be on Apple app stores and Android app stores and others. And so it'll fade away. What we're thinking with the President of the United States right now, the incoming president, that he has always said that he doesn't support a ban of TikTok. So I'm hoping that the art of the deal of him creating and finding a company to buy TikTok will be the greatest social networking deal of all time. And that's how we'll move forward to protect the US. But we still have to protect our children, and that's a separate conversation I'd love to have with this organization.
We're all going to take turns banging on our microphone just to make sure that everyone's paying attention.
Sorry about that.
And we're not the only country acting in this way, correct? Canada just did something as well?
Yes, yeah. So Canada, they did a weird thing because it's Canada, I guess. I don't know. But
that is not the official position of JFNA.
So they basically closed down the TikTok Canada corporation. But they said that they still can access TikTok, even though it's a national security threat, and that's why we're closing down TikTok Canada, people still can have access to it. My view is that they're waiting to see what we do here in the States. They've done the first level, closed down TikTok Canada. If our legislation holds up in the courts and TikTok is a divestiture, they want to see how that plays out before just banning it. The only country that has actually banned TikTok is India. And they did it several years ago, and it's worked well for them for other reasons. But then all these other countries, they're all kind of waiting for us to see how we do it.
So Ifat, talking about social media really would not be a thorough conversation if we didn't talk about kind of the granddaddy of them all, Facebook. And you've been very involved there, along with Karen Baral, who's our Vice President of Government Relations. You and she have been in many meetings together, and you've been advocating for decisive action against anti-Israel and anti-Semitic content. You've been providing them with really concrete information, data, and examples, and you've pushed for change. Tell us how it's gone. Has it had an impact? Have you seen any improvements, and what's still out there? What's unaddressed?
Thank you. My voice is low even with a microphone, so I'll try and project. And thank you. And I really like the kind of diverse crowd that I see, and I see that this influences really all age groups and all kind of people. So thanks for coming this afternoon. So has it had an impact? Yes, and I'll give some examples. Maybe too little. Maybe I think some of the impact that it's had is pretty immense, also in terms of on the platform and its influence on other platforms. Possibly too late, and I think the too late part is less because of our fault and more because of the company's fault. And I'll explain some of that. First, I want to say that it's completely the responsibility of the internet platforms to deal with these issues, right? A lot of us report, monitor, advocate. The companies have the ability to do this much better than any of us do. They have the resources, they have the data, and when we talk about solutions, we'll talk about transparency of data and access, but they have the data, definitely have the money to do this. So it's their responsibility, but unfortunately, a lot of us, JFNA, ADL, and others have had to do a lot of the groundwork in getting them to move on these issues. Part of, especially for anti-Semitism, what we need to do, it's considered as a hate speech issue on the platforms, right? Anti-Semitism is part of hate speech, and then each platform has its own policies about hate speech because of First Amendment rights in the US and other freedom of speech rights around the globe, and the UN and the international law, freedom of expression kind of regulations, if you call it that way. Then each company deals with it in their own way. And so we have to work with the companies to convince them where anti-Semitism is hate speech. And to show that, that's where like a lot of data and examples come through. And I'll give two examples. One is really on Holocaust denial distortion, and Adam mentioned that as well. It was in 2016 when Mark Zuckerberg first said publicly, loudly, probably very regrettably, that Holocaust denial is an issue of like facts and figures and data, and it's a historical discussion that he's leaving on the platform to figure out the truth. That's when I woke up to this issue, really. It was 4 years later, over 4 years later, in October 2020, that Facebook finally said, you know what, Holocaust denial distortion is hate speech against Jews, and it's anti-Semitic hate speech. And that was 4 years, even a bit more, of really advocating and saying, you know, somebody goes on Facebook with a post about how, you know, gas chambers never existed. They're not doing that because they really want somebody to show them pictures of the gas chambers and explain it to them. They're doing that because they want to disregard what Jewish people are saying. They want to claim that the Jews are just controlling, they made up the Holocaust. So it's showing that Holocaust denial distortion was anti-Semitism. You know what we've been seeing very strongly since October 7th? Not just claims, you know, denial of October 7th atrocities. Holocaust denial distortion has skyrocketed across all platforms, including Facebook. So we showed, like, we worked a lot. It took 4 years, probably 4 years, way too many. Here's another issue that came up fairly recently. In July 2024, Facebook announced that they're going to treat Zionist as a proxy for Jew as hate speech on their platform. It's limited, it's only tier 1 hate speech. They have a lot of regulations on this, so it's very specific situations, not all of it, never mind. The concept is there, when you use Zionist as a proxy for Jew, that's anti-Semitic hate speech. Now, Karen and myself and many others have spent years before October 7th, every single, like sometimes month, just saying, you know, you have to deal with the issue of Zionist as a proxy for Jew, because when we see anti-Semitism, that is what we see. And we showed examples. And it took October 7th, in that sense, for them to actually wake up and say, oh, you know what, you're right. Zionist is being used mainly as a proxy for Jews on the platform, and it's hate speech and anti-Semitic hate speech, and we are going to deal with it and remove it. So these things have had a big influence, but probably it just comes too late with the platforms. And it takes a lot of hard work and advocacy that shouldn't come there. And I'm going to say a couple more things here. One, you know, it's also really nice to have the policies in place, but if they're not enforced, we're not going to achieve much. And so a lot of it is enforcement. Again, the companies should do this first and foremost, enforce their own policies and make sure that, you know, they're actually not allowing this content on their platform or reducing its reach. We do a lot of monitoring. It's very hard work, but without enforcement, without pushing on enforcement, it doesn't do as much. I'll let you, before, one thing I will say too here is that we have a lot of these things still coming, and a lot in the process, and we need a lot of pressure on each of these. I'll give, again, two short examples. Facebook actually has an oversight board. It's like their, kind of like their Supreme Court in a sense. It's a bit of a different structure, but
Although they're free to ignore it.
Yes.
they're free. Well, I'm a lawyer, unfortunately, so. But also how things come to them and what their influence is. But in essence, they are able, like people can appeal decisions by Facebook, by Meta in general now, to the advisory board. The advisory board is, for me, it's a little bit more, the Supreme Court, maybe it's more like the UN for me these days, because it deals with all kinds of issues. 30% of the issues that the advisory board has been dealing with in the past few years are related to Israel and Jewish issues. Now, there's no way that 30% of things on Facebook are related to Israel and Jewish issues as much as we would want to think about it like that, but 30%. So it's really, there's a lot going on there that we need to put a focus on. They recently, for example, noted that Shaheed, using the word Shaheed on a person that has been designated as a terrorist person or as a terrorist organization, so this is designated in the US or other international forums. If you say Shaheed person who has been designated, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are praising them. And so we're going to leave that on the platform, which is just, for me, I was like, it's a person who has been designated as a terrorist. You have to deal with that. I don't care what somebody said about them. If it could be positive, you're dealing with that. So we have a few of those down the line. Somebody mentioned things like from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, is being debated in this oversight board, then with Meta. And there's, just this week, they're also debating things like, similar to Shaheed, is saying rest in peace. I'm not going to mention many of the people who are resting in some way or another from designated terrorist organizations. But now they're saying, well, that's also not necessarily a praise or condolences, and maybe we leave that on our platform. So there's a lot of new things coming up all the time that we need to keep track of. I welcome anybody to connect with me in my mailing list and keep track of these, because we need a lot of pressure so that we have more influence and not that late.
Thank you so much. It sounds like quite a fight. Gretchen, your line of work is fascinating and is something that I think there's no way I could do. In behavioral science research, it's been transformative what you've been able to accomplish. And you're known for asking tough questions, diving deep to uncover root causes. In your view, what is driving the surge of anti-Semitism on social media? And why is the content resonating or having such an impact? And then, sorry for such a multi-part question, but then
taking notes.
what strategies should, see, I did it now, are you all up? What strategies should Jewish Federation adopt to counter the influence effectively?
That's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you guys are here today. It's funny, I'm an older millennial. I used to play Oregon Trail. And I sometimes long for the days of rotary phones and record players.
I died of dysentery many times myself.
We have, in many ways, a wild, wild west, or wild, wild Oregon Trail right now when it comes to social media in the United States. And one of the things that's very difficult is that really has been taken advantage of. The wide open nature of our social networks are truly security threats for the United States. I first came to work with JFNA, and they're awesome, by the way, if you didn't already know, on anti-Semitism and what was happening with Israel. But one of the things that we did in our research was look at how people 18 to 34 were thinking about Israel, were thinking about the United States, were thinking about Jewish people, everything. And our first hint of something's really off was that 18 to 34-year-olds who use TikTok as a primary news source were 2 deviations outside of the norm in terms of their views on America, on Jewish people, on Israel, Hamas, everything. And to translate that out of research speak, they were looking really weird, and they didn't look normal. They had skewed views that didn't make sense with the rest of the population. Now, correlation is not causation, of course, but in working with a lot of other folks in intelligence in Israel and worldwide, we saw that it is very much the case that foreign nations, Russia, China, Iran, are using social media to push anti-Semitic beliefs, to push skewed views into the American public. In fact, one of the groups that we work with said that reliably 60% of all anti-Semitic content online is delivered by Russian bots. That's crazy sauce, right? Crazy sauce. Now, one of the things that we have, this is sort of a perfect storm. A lot of Americans kind of think when it comes to what we consume on social media is like a buffet. We can just go and like pick the sushi and the carrots and definitely the Jell-O, but not that cottage cheese, it looks sketchy. But that's the wrong way of thinking about it. Writ large, what the information environment that we're in, it's a lot more like a storm. You can't help but get wet. Despite the fact that we think that we're impervious to the impact of messaging online, we get soaked with propaganda. In fact, Senator Mark Kelly a couple weeks ago said that up to 30% of all political information on our social media is foreign disinfo. Again, crazy sauce. We have an issue, and I think it's really important to shine a light on the fact that our freedom of speech in our completely open system is being leveraged against us and causing a lot of the partisan rancor that we see. Everything. A lot of this is coming from there because they don't want us to get along. So we need to shine a light on that, but we also need to meet the moment with regulation. I think we shouldn't say the word regulation because that's not a sexy word, but with guardrails and with a more mature understanding of freedom of speech. We need to grow up a bit about it, unfortunately. We need to think about it in an age of propaganda, what we can do, because right now what we're doing isn't working. I don't think I answered your question fully, did I?
You're doing great. You're doing great. I appreciate it.
Okay. But we need to get ahead of it. What we're calling social media right now, an unregulated social media, is the gasoline faucet. We need to find ways to turn that faucet off, or at least see that there's gasoline coming in. And things like Yvette talked about, the visibility, the transparency is going to be really, really critical. There's pieces of legislation out there, the Platform Accountability Transparency Act, which I think about all day long, and I wake up thinking about in the middle of the night. It would allow researchers, journalists to be able to see that foreign disinfo is coming in and be able to name it and claim it and talk about it. Right now we can't do that. It's a black box. But we also need to reform things like Section 230, which would hold social media companies accountable to what they are allowing to propagate, like Nazi content on X. Gosh, I'm really going, sorry. Like Nazi content on X, which is getting hundreds and millions of views. Hundreds of millions of views. We have anti-Semitism problem that is in the left-leaning spaces in the far left, but it's also in the far right. It's different expressions of things, but it's a problem no matter where it is. And we're very committed to taking it out wherever we can. And the first step in that is social media guardrails. So we should go do that now.
So, Gretchen, I think you've hit on something really critical. We have the First Amendment.
Yeah.
And so I think we all get a little squeamish when it comes to talking about how we counter disinformation, because we get so close to that line that we're all raised never to cross. And Rick, you talk about we're not regulating content, we're regulating conduct. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit more, because you have this extensive background in tech policy and advocacy. What are the most effective steps that Congress and regulatory bodies can take to ensure greater accountability? We've heard about this piece of legislation, but what else? What else is out there? And what do you recommend as long-term solutions against online hate and misinformation?
Well, I want to pick up on what Gretchen was saying about Section 230. How many of you heard of Section 230 before I go into details of what it does? Ooh. Okay, so we're we're in Washington, so we use a lot of acronyms and shorthand. So Section 230 was part of the 1996 Telecommunications Act that basically provides liability protections for platforms on user-generated content. So basically the concept is if a user uploads something, as a platform, I am not responsible for it. I worked on that legislation. I supported that legislation because at the time we were dealing with AOL and CompuServe. How many of you remember AOL and CompuServe, right? And Prodigy.
And in fairness, it was actually very important in letting the internet flourish at the time, right?
Well, yes and no. I think we could have gone through the court systems and ended up maybe in a better place if we did not short circuit the court system with Section 230. And I think that's what we kind of need to get back to figure out how we balance the First Amendment free speech rights with the responsibilities of platforms. And we kind of short circuited that. But the concept and why I support it was it created an incentive for platforms to proactively moderate content because under certain legal doctrine, if I moderate, I have knowledge and therefore I can be held accountable for it. So if I don't know anything is on my platform, think of it as a newspaper stand. You can't sue the newspaper stand for libel in the New York Times, right? And so you wanted to create that system. But what you also were trying to do as a moderator is to make sure that you could find hate speech, that you could do all these things. What companies did after, when Facebook started to grow, Google, YouTube, all these other platforms, they forgot the moderation part. What they said is, we're not censors. We can't censor the internet. And so they took they had a blind eye to all the harm that was happening on their sites, which has built over years to where we are today. So Section 230, reforming Section 230 to get away from the ability for platforms to hide behind a legal doctrine and be able to be held accountable for their conduct is critical. So one of the things that I'm working on is the sunset legislation, because we don't have exactly the right way to change Section 230. I have ideas, everybody has ideas. But the most important thing we need to do is to sunset 230, because right now, a tie, the platforms win. Because if nothing happens, they have a liability shield. So if you look at like the Kids Online Safety Act and all these other bills, they just never get across the finish line because a tie, they win. So we need to sunset it so that way they know there's going to be a time limit, and then it brings them to the table so we can have comprehensive Section 230 reform to address the free speech issues along with the conduct issues.
That's great. Thank you. Ifat, as someone involved in international affairs and technology's role in human rights, what global approaches, cross-border collaborations, legislative ideas do you have, or things that have worked in other countries that you think maybe could be adopted in the US or Canada?
Canada's actually pretty good on this one, but
Oh, good.
I'll balance out the Canada comments. I'll say, we definitely, we have to collaborate cross-border. You know who's the best collaborators cross-border? You mentioned this a bit. The haters. People have been talking for a long time about how hate has become, and anti-Semitism has become like a horseshoe, where like right and left really combine. We did a lot of research post-October 7 on kind of the movement from Telegram to social media of messages from terrorist organizations, and one of the things that we found when the researchers brought this to me, I was like, this is amazing. That like ISIS is quoting the radical left is using memes from like ISIS, and I'm not even talking about like ISIS propaganda. So they are working together, they've collaborated. We definitely have to collaborate both across the spectrum, right? Across the political spectrum, across the community spectrum, and globally, because the internet as well. I mean, there's a lot of influence for Section 230. There's a lot of influence on freedom of expression, but it's a global platform, and what other countries are doing is influencing both what the platforms have to do and what they're capable of doing. So if the Digital Services Act in the EU is forcing companies to put in better transparency reporting mechanisms, we can use those transparency reporting mechanisms. What they're claiming, we can't do that, that's too expensive, that's too hard for us. If they are obligated to do that under the DSA in Europe, under the Online Harms Bill in the UK, and some legislation coming up in Canada, And other countries, you mentioned India or like random other like countries, not random, just countries around the globe, then we need to use that and the tools that are being put in place also to benefit monitoring. We mentioned access to data, which is huge. Part of the reason that TikTok and others, and in our research as well, we can't find a lot of hate speech on TikTok is because nobody can actually research what's going on TikTok. Same thing on Instagram, right? It's really hard to do videos and images, and so we're like doing like hashtag searches or like comment searches and text searches. That's not how things function on TikTok, on Instagram, on many other platforms. YouTube, dare I say, YouTube is like somehow not getting enough attention that it should get in this world, but it is the most hateful of all. So things like access to data, transparency, and also collaboration across the platforms and collaboration between civil society and private companies, social media companies, internet platforms in general. There's some forms we see, especially in the terrorism world, a lot of just collaboration with civil society, but also between the platforms themselves. That can be really helpful on hate speech, on anti-Semitism as well. So tagging, in a way, they call it hashing, information from one platform that is terrorist information or a terrorist post, so that all the other platforms can really quickly identify it when it comes up. Why can we not do that on hate speech, right? Yes, you need collaboration, you need resources, etc. But you can do that if you can identify it. The other companies don't have to do the exact same thing, but they can identify it much more quickly. So there's a lot out there in terms of collaboration on all levels that we can do and learn from. I do think we have a really good moment in time because Europe is putting all these regulations. The US is looking into different regulations like the TikTok bill and others, but there's a lot that we can still do.
One other platform I just want to throw into the mix, and this could be for any of you, Congressman Richie Torres has really shined a spotlight on Twitch lately as being a place just with unapologetic hate speech, anti-Semitism. Is this something that's come up for any of you in your research, or do you have anything? Now, Twitch is a streaming platform for gamers that is owned by Amazon. So if you have any thoughts on that.
I'll mention actually, Twitch is great. I'll mention two other platforms in a second that I think we do. Twitch is actually, a year and a bit ago when I sat with them, there's Trust and Safety. Their fastest growing online content is actually cooking, not even gaming anymore, it's cooking. So like it's live streaming, so people watch other people cook. People watch other people play games. When I sat there first, I was like, my kids are young, but I really hope they have better things to do than watch other people play, but maybe they won't. And then Twitch's whole Trust and Safety team, which is those who are responsible for compliance with all things like safety on their platforms, was about 4 people at the time. 95%, more than 95% of their time, she said, they deal with spam. So one, they definitely have to put a lot more resources, a lot more care, and we have to put a lot more focus on these platforms as well. That's how they got away with almost a year of basically banning Israeli users from the platform. A bit under the carpet, I admit, like we were talking, but didn't really realize how bad the situation was. I'll mention two, and then I'll be quiet for a bit. Wikipedia, and Adam mentioned this as well. Wikipedia is one, it's a US-based Wikimedia organization. In March, we put out research saying, the editing on Wikipedia is horrendous. They are erasing Jewish history, they're erasing Israeli history, they are changing the narrative on everything, and they keep saying, well, we let everybody just do their own editing, we have nothing to do about it. It's just a lie. There's a lot that they're doing and can do about this. Another platform that is actually US-based, again, this is not some Telegram, somebody sitting in the Russia or the UAE that is then arrested in France. Gab, for example. Gab is a platform, a US social media network that is hosting millions and millions of pieces of content and videos of neo-Nazis and terrorists. And these are all things that we do need to not, we need to not lose focus on when we deal so much with the TikToks, the Facebooks, etc.
Thank you. So, Gretchen, now that we're all suitably depressed.
Oh, no.
We just started.
I was going to say something worse, so I don't know.
Oh, geez. All right. Well, maybe start with the worst thing, but then with your expertise, What can the Federation be doing to shift public perception, reduce the influence of harmful content? What do you recommend? Because these are the folks who are going to go back into their communities and be engaging in social media, and we want to be effective and we want to fight back, but we're this really small segment of the population, and the algorithms tend not to favor content that's only shared amongst a small group.
Right.
So what can we do?
Well, that's a great question. You know, certainly we're in a moment where we do need broader system change, and one of the things that we've been talking about at the Federation level is system change and advocating for legislation like PATA, like reform of Section 230, and we really do need to take this very seriously. Okay, that's a depressing thing. I am very concerned about something that was boosted 2 days ago by Elon Musk, something that President Trump said, and it's heavy on my heart. I'm hoping that people who will take up this cause and are conservative or want to work in a Trump administration will go join the Trump administration to advocate for social media legislation, because right now the tenor of things appears to be the case of a desire for unmitigated free speech. Trump was on the record talking about how he doesn't want to reform Section 230, how he's going to take away aid from any university that is studying disinformation or student aid from any college studying disinformation. And J.D. Vance the other day said that if Europe will try to regulate Elon Musk's platform, then they'll pull out of NATO. That scares me. In all vulnerability, I'm afraid. And I know a lot of disinfo researchers at the university level who are planning on losing their jobs. And we're going to be in a world of hurt in that. I'm sorry, I'm being very depressing. But one of the things that we study at Worthy is how Americans know what's true. And I got to tell you right now, a lot of Americans don't know what's true. Like they bring in images of being in a fog. I remember a young lady saying, I don't think we've ever been on the moon, else we'd have a gas station on there, which is crazy sauce to say. But here we are. People are manipulated. They don't know what's true. And I see it getting worse. So in my view, I think the thing that the Federation can do, people in this room, is to advocate for guardrails around our democracy because of anti-Semitism, because without it, our truth is lost, our ability to talk to each other is lost, our ability to suppress hate speech is lost. And making the case to this incoming administration, I think, is going to be really urgent work and very important work. I'll be more optimistic tomorrow once I recover from what I saw these past 2 days. But I can't tell you, what you guys did with TikTok is killer, like ninja style moves, amazing. So I have deep faith in the Federation and the Jewish community and our community that we'll be able to get something done. But I think it's going to be very, very important to get to work on day one.
All right. Now, the most interesting part is let's hear from all of you. Who's got questions? Oh, wow. All right. I thought I was going to have to really draw it out. Usually no one wants to go first, but we got people willing to go first. So Eli, yeah.
Hi. So I'm glad that you mentioned Wikipedia and Twitch, but I'm wondering about getting on the ground floor of newer platforms that are emerging. Obviously, in the response to the Elon Musk takeover of Twitter/X, we're seeing, Meta came out with Threads. Is there a point in, I guess, gambling on platforms like Blue Sky and seeing if they are going to succeed in getting on the ground floor with them in terms of trust and safety? Or do you find it more important to focus on the hydra of Meta and their 700 platforms that are social media?
Yeah, I mean, from my standpoint, you have to create a level playing field. And that's part of the guardrails, because these companies are not going to act in our best interest. They're going to act in their best interest, in the interest of their stockholders. And their stockholders right now are saying we like a unregulated internet. Who wouldn't? I've started many businesses. I wish I couldn't be sued for a product I made, Gosh, how great would that be, right? From a business standpoint. Now, maybe people get hurt because of that, but from a business standpoint, and that's what we're allowing right now, which is why Section 230 is so critical, because it creates a level playing field of raising the standards of a duty of care that makes sure that they can be held accountable of how they're designing, and then other businesses can flourish. And I heard the gentleman from the ADL talk about there's going to be all these opportunities for businesses to get started. We heard all that on child safety, right? There's all these businesses are going to be started because there's the right thing and parents care. When you're facing a $1 trillion corporation whose profit margins are massive and they don't have to do anything, it doesn't matter what comes in the market. They'll just get squashed. And so we do need to have the guardrails in place to take care of it, to allow competition, to allow businesses to flourish, and to protect our democracy. I'll just say one thing. This is such an important issue for the Jewish community, but this is such an important issue for our whole country. And that's the message that we have to get out there, because the threats by our foreign adversaries of using our social networking sites. There was a letter from Senator Warner that went out about U.S. companies that were helping and hiding Russian influence campaigns. And we've been telling them that they've been doing this forever. Why are these U.S. corporations helping Russian influence campaigns? Why are they not working with the U.S. government to protect? And so all these issues are out there. So we have to do it all together. It's all about just not the Jewish Federation, who has an incredibly important voice, but expanding it to say this is about all of us. And how do we address it? And we are a democracy. We do have members of Congress. You know, the president is incredibly powerful, and I think he'll do the right thing, hopefully. But at the same time, we all have members of Congress in our, that represent us, and senators. And your voices, that's how we won on TikTok. It was your voices that got us over the finish line. And that's what we need of activation, working with, the Jewish federations.
Yeah. We haven't said,
Go
two
for
quick
it.
comments, but I haven't said AI yet, so here it comes. But one place we have actually seen the influence of these kind of working on the bigger companies, the bigger campaigns. One, it does influence like newer companies. Either they will, come as we want to be the complete opposite, and then you have to deal with it a bit differently because they're like we have no guardrails at all, or they already come with that. And we've actually seen that with AI, because a lot of the bigger companies, when they do their kind of like red testing, when they test the system before putting them out, they're already testing for this stuff. We see they publish the questions and the testing that they do, and a lot of them are already testing for things like hate speech and anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, distortion. Whether it's perfect, whether it's what we want, we could review that. But we have seen that creating kind of a snowball. I want to say one quick thing on disinformation, because you both mentioned it, and maybe this is also something that the federations can work on. Does anybody know how fact-checking works on the big platforms? I'll do half rhetorical question. So actually, when somebody flags something as possible disinformation or misinformation, it goes to an outside organization not connected to any of the platforms. And outside can be a company, it can be a nonprofit, and they, if they choose to, will review that, and then they will do their own fact checking and declare whether it's true or not. So here's something that was declared as not disinformation after October 7th. Hamas is ISIS. It was flagged as disinformation because Hamas is not ISIS. And then the platforms let it remain on the platform, had to remove it from the platforms as disinformation. So Hamas is not actually ISIS, so we have to remove it because that's disinformation. This actually happened on some of the big platforms. So the whole idea of how we look at disinformation on the platform, how it's dealt, who is dealing with it, their incentives and motivation, is another area that I think we can deal with on many levels, and also just through the probably number one solution for all of this, educating. So working with our students and college students and high school students and everybody who is on this platform on how can they themselves look at information and figure out what's true and what's not true, and where they can actually check sources and what they can do about it.
Thank you. Who's next? I'm going to leave it to Eli to...
Just to add to that, because that was be my question, because not only and I'm Canadian, so I'm giving.
Hey.
So for because high school students may still be too young to advocate to government officials, but we have to also educate our leaders. So we, as many in different, going back to our communities, how do we educate our leaders about what to look for, how to be, bring that digital literacy lens to them, when they're looking at social media, what their kids are, so how do we take that step, even before advocacy?
I think that's what Jewish Federation does, right? I mean, you have information on all the policies that are going through and what you're working on.
So that is a great toss, thank you, because I will tell you that we need your help. We certainly, as you've heard, this is not just a Jewish community issue. This is an American issue. But we in this room represent the Jewish community, and I can tell you in my role with DPGA, the Domestic Policy Council, that we need more engagement from all of our activists around the country. And your local CRCs, I'm sure, in whatever form they take, would be thrilled to have more involvement. This is a moment in our history as Jews and in our history as Americans or Canadians that we really need to stand up and be counted. And this issue of social media is one of many. So if you are interested in getting more involved in this work, we can put you to work, and we can connect you if you don't already know who to connect with in your local federations. We can help make that happen too. So feel free to come up to me, to Eli. Eli is part of the team in DC working on government relations, and there's other staff around as well, but we're the two in this room who can really help guide you. So thank you for that, and please, all of you, thank you in advance for helping us on this journey if you're not already on it. And we'll take the next question. Last one.
For those of you who can't see me,
And I'm sorry, this is going to be the last question. I just got told, so we can all make it to President Herzog.
Cool. I will be super fast, I promise. So I'll sit down so you guys can see. As is obvious, I'm probably the youngest person in this room by a couple of decades. I am a...
Well, now wait a minute.
Hang on a second.
Wait a minute.
I understand.
Yeah.
Forgive me. By a couple of generations. How about that? I am a Zillennial, so I'm at the older end of the millennial, or at the older end of the Zoomer generation, baby millennial. So I'm a part of the Changemakers cohort, and I am someone who actively uses TikTok, and I will openly admit to that, and I want to contextualize that by saying I live in rural Iowa. My Jewish cohort community in Iowa is about 5 people, and most of them are about 40 to 50 years older than me. TikTok has been integral in the ability to connect with other Jewish people, content creators, and even organizations like Lost Tribe have been incredibly meaningful in my Jewish journey as an adult and as someone who, prior to the advent of TikTok, had no Jewish community beforehand, except for closed Facebook groups that were regularly inundated by trolls. How do you guys I don't want to say sleep at night, but how do you guys respond to the fact that a TikTok ban theoretically is going to be removing critical social groups for people who are marginalized individuals, BIPOC individuals, and people like me who don't have access to standard communities unfortunately a lot of the people in this room do, because they're coming from these bigger communities like Toronto, Seattle, New York. What's left for me in the vacuum? What's left for the people of my age?
Yeah.
So great question. Great question.
Yeah.
And I just, first of all, thank you.
Yay.
Thank you for being a part of Changemakers. Thank you for being engaged in our community. I want to start off by saying, and then I'll toss it to them, that the legislation we advocated for was not a TikTok ban. It was to remove TikTok from the Chinese Communist Party and force a divestiture from ByteDance. But with that,
I think that's, again, part of the misinformation campaign of TikTok. TikTok went around and started saying that this is a TikTok ban. They had thousands of young people during the vote call their members of Congress with a direct link, and these kids were saying they were going to kill members of Congress if they voted for it. They were going to commit suicide. And that's why we won, was because members of Congress and their staffs, I was in the offices, I watched this happen real time during the hearings. And the reaction was, if they can do that for this national security issue, what about when they invade Taiwan? What about other geopolitical issues that they're influencing, that we have data around the world of what they're doing to undermine our democracy? So how do I sleep at night? Because I look at you as our future. I want you to have a country that's safe and secure and not run over by a communist China, the CCP, and other foreign countries that are trying to undermine us. So I sleep at night because I have kids, and I know I'm protecting them and their futures, because sometimes you're just a little too young to understand what the national security threats are. And yes, you can connect to communities, but they're gathering all that data to use against us. They're weaponizing the data. And that's how I sleep at night.
But hang on.
Yeah.
Hang on, because
one more thing.
this is a great question. It's a very worthy question, because you are telling us that you're in a community where you don't have a lot of opportunities to connect face to face. So while I agree with what you had to say about the threat and that we're doing what is the responsible thing to do, you also have a legitimate question of how can you connect and how can you do it responsibly? Does anyone have some thoughts for her on that?
Yeah. You go. Yeah, well, I was going to say too, I mean, the TikTok is not a ban, and it's looking to replace ownership, with someone that will not propagandize our people, which is a good thing. And I think that clearly social media is a tool of connection for people, both in urban centers, suburban, rural. It's very important. I think there's probably gobs of people here who could talk about other connection opportunities, but I think that's a tension I feel too, of course. And we all feel, right? And I'm a terrible dancer, and sometimes I go on TikTok to see what the latest moves are, and I don't do them, but my point.
The context, I think, is that TikTok is different for each generation.
Of course.
TikTok to my generation is no longer the dancing app.
Right.
It's where we're getting our...
Right, exactly.
And that's the problem.
I do understand that it was never about ban.
And
I do understand, from the news perspective, it was never a ban. I understand the language is divestiture, but let's be realistic. We know that they're not going to do that.
Right.
And that's the point. The reason that China won't let that happen is because they have an algorithm that is weaponized against the United States. Why would they give that up? And that's the evidence that shows why they need to, and why the divestiture is so important. And so, yes, you're right. It's not just dance, and we show that. 40% of 18 to 24-year-olds get their news from TikTok. It's not news. It's misinformation. And so the fact that young people think it's news is also scary. So those are the things, and that's why we're trying to work on the divestiture bill.
And again, just to put some context on it too, that I think is pointed out sometimes but not always, is that, for example, a foreign government, any foreign government, ally or adversary, is not allowed to own a broadcast network in the United States of America. And so this, in some ways, what's that?
Or newspapers.
Right, and so in some ways this is applying those older standards to a more modern medium, and the TikTok bill is actually far more limited than that ban, because the TikTok bill is limited to just foreign adversaries as designated in the bill. But anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Yvonne said something.
I'm gonna change the tone a bit. So if you want to
Please.
continue.
Oh, well, I mean, if you look at it, right, there's news on TikTok, right, what have you, and we know from working with Israelis, there's some things that are being boosted, things that are being suppressed, that it is being curated in a very particular viewpoint, and I'm going to show my hand here. I sometimes go on the Daily Mail to look at Kate Middleton pictures because she's like my fashion hero, but also it has a very particular perspective. And I find that even within a week of looking at it, right, I'm more fearful of the world, things are scary, right? It has a particular perspective that it is feeding up. And that is certainly the case of these social media platforms. They are advancing particular perspectives, which lead people to do certain things. And we really need to get a handle on that. We do, because we need to know what's true, and we need to, okay.
I'll say maybe a couple positive things about TikTok.
Oh, good, okay.
But one, there's some advantages to working with a company that is owned by Chinese people who care less about censorship when we're looking at anti-Semitism and hate speech, and I think we're trying to balance that out, right? Because they don't follow First Amendment. They don't have that as an argument for everything. And actually, they are sometimes maybe even overreactive or overprotective of the positivity of the platform that in some senses makes my life easier. But I understand the national security issues, and I think we need to balance those out. I do think some of these pressures that have been put on TikTok through legislation and other issues has actually moved the platform to try and do more on the issues of hate speech. They are doing a lot of projects. We have, I'll give a shout out here because we have a project with TikTok that actually started with Facebook and TikTok, and now might be going over to X, we'll see, of providing reliable information about the Holocaust to users on TikTok. So if you go on TikTok and you search for Hitler or Auschwitz or David Irvine, for those who remember, you will actually have a prompt saying, if you want more reliable information on the Holocaust, go to aboutholocaust.org, which is the website of UNESCO and the World Jewish Congress with facts about the Holocaust. And that has actually had a reach, it has reached hundreds of millions of people we look at 6 month periods. 30 million of those actually entered the website to learn more, not from, Holocaust denial videos on TikTok or elsewhere. So it's actually had an immense influence, even on even that first reaction when somebody's starting. And we're working on a lot more projects like that, like labeling things or just having people pause for a second before they post something that could be considered hateful or Holocaust denial. So I do think there is a place for this pressure from many different places, also to get the companies like TikTok and others to move and to think creatively and to use their resources and capabilities to do more positive engagements. I know they are looking to work, for example, more with young Jewish people and influencers to increase that voice. I think that's a place where every federation and every organization that wants to work on the platforms, they will give resources, not just TikTok, but a lot of different, they will give resources to expand our voices, to push projects, to push things to audiences, to help the content be more viral, so there's a lot of place where these kind of pressures also push the companies to help to get more positive messaging outside, to get more positive content. Maybe we will end this on a more positive note. There's a lot of space for that.
I just say that the one place TikTok is banned is China. I think that kind of sums it up.
So I want to get you all out of here because we have a very special guest next. But before you leave, Ashley, thank you again.
Thank you, Ashley.
Because one of the things that I think her question and the reactions to it highlighted is that there is a significant divide depending on your age on how you use the various platforms. So I'll just talk about myself. I'm 44. Facebook came out the year after I graduated from college. And already a long time ago, Facebook became the bastion of old people like me, right? Young people don't really use it. And so we need to also listen to the people that are using these platforms to tell us how to engage in them the best. And when it comes to the responsible regulation of it, we're going to keep working on it because it's not about denying anybody a place to engage or to find community, but it is about making sure that our adversaries, both adversaries of the Jewish community, adversaries of our countries, are not able to manipulate the information, to manipulate the populace against Jews, to use information in ways that puts children at risk. And so this has got to be, like everything we do, a big collaboration where we break down the lines between age groups, between denominations, and we work together to responsibly regulate and legislate around social media. And so thank you all so much for being here. And let's enjoy the next session.